Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the circumference to diameter ratio of a circle. Now you can see hopefully in the thing that means we're going to be calculating pi, the ratio of the circumference of a circle to its diameter. One thing I really want you to keep in mind here is when you're thinking about this formula for the circumference, it's not so much that people discovered the formula for a circle, it's that they discovered that the ratio between a circle's circumference, its distance around the circle, and its diameter was always the same thing, and this number they called pi. So the only vocabulary word here is circumference, and that is the distance around the world, around a circle. And so the question is, which one is bigger, the height of the can or its circumference? So think about that for a second. And it turns out the circumference is actually bigger than the height. If we're going in terms of tennis ball units, the height is about 3 tennis balls, and the circumference, it turns out, is a little bit more than that, a little bit more than 3 tennis balls worth. So in class, we're going to be cutting out some circles to measure for this activity. But for this, if you're at home and trying to do some of this stuff, where'd my webcam go? There it is. Okay, so if you're at home trying to do this, just go ahead and find something that is circular. And if you don't happen to have a cloth tape measure like this, which I'm going to guess most of you don't, you can use a piece of string to measure around it, and then a ruler or something to measure the string, and then measure the diameter of the circle. So if you were to go and measure around this, just taking my tape measure, measuring around it, I am getting a little over 33 centimeters, 33.1 centimeters. And so I would take that, write it down, and then I'm going to measure across the circle. And when I measure across the circle, I get about, at the biggest point, again, you got to try to measure the diameter. So through the center, I get right about 10.5 centimeters. So 10.5 centimeters for the diameter. And my circumference is 33.1 centimeters. And so all we're going to do here, I'm going to take that with me as I go to the next page. All we're going to be doing here is computing the ratio. The ratio is just a comparison of the object's circumference to diameter with division. So specifically, when we're talking about a ratio, we're talking about dividing. So we're going to go ahead and divide that. 33 point, I'm just going to do this on a separate calculator here. 33.1 divided by 10.5, and I get 3.152380952. So 3.15238. I don't know. Just stop somewhere. So that's my circumference to diameter ratio. Now, when you did this, and again, I would highly encourage you to do this, you should get a value that's very, very similar to that. And so this value is called pi. It's very, very close to 3, just a little bit bigger than 3. And so that's what pi is. It's the ratio of the circumference to the diameter. And then we could have the equation pi equals circumference over diameter. And if we wanted to solve that equation for c, we'd multiply by d, and we'd have c equals pi times d. We could also replace d, because the diameter is equal to twice the radius. We could take the d out and put in 2r. And so that's where we get that formula c equals 2 pi r. And so our formulas here are c equals pi d, to put in a pi symbol. So pi d, or 2 times pi times r. And the reason we're not writing this as pi 2r would be absolutely fine if we did that. It's just that we usually like to put the number first, then pi comes, then whatever variable comes in there after that. So those are your two options for the formula for circumference. Either the circumference is equal to pi times the diameter of a circle, or the circumference is equal to 2 pi times the radius of the circle. And pi is a value which is irrational. It's got a decimal that repeats, not randomly, but repeats without any pattern forever and ever and ever. And so one of the things that we're going to be talking about how to do today is how to leave our answers in terms of pi. Because pi is, there's no exact way to put pi into an answer. Even if you use your calculator, it's not going to be exact. It's always going to be a rounded answer. Even if you put all 10 digits that your calculator shows, it's still rounding. So we're going to leave all of our answers here in terms of pi. And so the first one here, r equals 4 inches. The radius is 4 inches, find c. So we'd be using the formula c equals 2, I'm going to bring up my thing here, 2 pi r. So that's our formula. It's always a good idea to write the formula down first, and then we can plug in what we know, and we know r is 4 inches. So in our next row here, we'd have c equals 2 times pi times 4, and we don't want to put that in our calculator because our calculator is going to round that answer, and we don't want to do that. What we can instead do is use the fact that we are allowed to switch up the order of multiplication. So c equals 2 pi r is the exact same thing as writing c equals 2 times 4 times pi. And 2 times 4 is 8. So c equals 8 pi. And because our radius was in inches, our circumference is going to be in inches. And so that would be our work for our first one. Now, do you need to show every single step? Of course not. But you do need to leave the pi in it, and you do need to have a unit in all of these. So next one, we've got C. They're telling us their circumference, and they want us to find the radius. Again, we're going to leave this in terms of pi. So always, always, always start off by writing your formula. Since we're finding r, we're going to use the formula that has the r in it. So C equals 2 times pi times r. And we're going to plug in what we know. This time what we know is the c. So we're going to replace c with 3 pi and equals 2 pi r. And we're going to start solving for this thing. So what we've got here, this is all multiplication on this side. So what I need to do is I need to divide on both sides. I can divide by the 2 pi altogether. That is an m. I don't know what's going on with that. I can divide by 2 pi on one side. I can divide by 2 pi on the other side. On the right-hand side, it cancels out. So 2 divided by 2 cancels out. Pi divided by pi cancels out. And we're left with just r on this side. On the left-hand side, similarly, the pi's are going to cancel out. And we've got 3 halves. 3 divided by 2. And we're just going to leave it as 3 divided by 2. And because our question was in inches, our answer needs to be in inches as well. Okay, one more here with this. We've got C equals 10 inches. Now we want to find D. So in this case, we want to write our formula with D in it instead of pi. So, or instead of R. So C equals pi times D. We know C is 10. So 10 equals pi times D. And this time, what we need to do is we need to divide by pi. Now, when we divide by pi this time, you're going to see there's nothing on the other side that's going to cancel out with this. It'll cancel on the right, but it won't cancel on the left. And so we're fine with just leaving it as 10 divided by pi equals the diameter. And again, this one is in inches, so we want it in inches. Whatever unit is there, we'll just keep. Circumference and diameter are both measurements of length. So you're measuring them in just normal inches, normal centimeters, normal whatever. So 10 divided by pi inches. So a couple of other examples here, a little bit more involved. If a circle is inscribed in a square with a side of 10 centimeters, what is the circumference? So here you're going to want to draw a picture. I've got a square with a circle inscribed in it, and the side is 10 centimeters. Now what you can see here is if that side is 10 centimeters, so is the diameter is 10 centimeters. And so now we can use our formula. We know that the circumference is equal to pi times the diameter. I'm trying to type as much of this as I can so it's more legible. And we know that the diameter is 10 inches. So C equals pi times 10. And usually we don't write it like that. So we're going to rewrite it as C equals 10 pi inches. Or this one was centimeters, sorry. We always want to write the number before the pi. That's just usually the normal way of writing it in a math class. And so there we go. Make sure you're writing the formula, plugging in your values, and evaluating. That is going to be really important. Okay, next up here, we've got a fountain, circular fountain with a radius of 5 feet. And we want to know what happens if the radius is doubled. What happens to the circumference of that shape? Well, let's go ahead and figure that one out. So we know that for circumference, it's going to equal 2 times pi times r. And we want to see what happens when we double the circumference from 5 to 10 feet. So in the first example here, we'd have our circumference equals 2 times pi times 5. And in the second example, we'd have c equals 2 times pi times 10. We can still put our two numbers together. It's all multiplication, so the order doesn't matter. 2 times 5 is 10, so c equals 10 pi in the first one. And in the second one, 2 times 10, c equals 20 pi. And so as you can see here, if we doubled our radius, we just doubled our circumference. There's no weird things going on there. This is because they're both linear units, both just measures of length. We'll come back and talk about that area thing in a little bit, I think. So the question is, how does the circumference to diameter ratio change? And the answer is it does not at all. As we saw, it doesn't matter what size circle you measure, it's always the same. So our final question here is a little bit more involved. If we estimate the diameter of the Earth as 80,000 miles, find the average speed in miles per hour Phileas Fogg must travel to circumnavigate the equator in 80 days. So we've got some work to do here. The first thing we do need to know, though, is the circumference of the Earth. And so we know that the circumference equals the pi times the diameter. And in this case, that's pi times 8,000. And in this case, it doesn't make much sense to leave this in terms of pi. We don't want to be able to say something like 15 pi miles per hour, because no one's really going to know what that means. So this is a good place to just go ahead and convert right away. So we've got to take pi. We can either use the pi symbol on our calculator, or you can use 3.14. And we're going to get 25,132.74 miles as the circumference of the Earth. Then we've got to figure out how fast he has to go. So it's going to take him 80 days, but we want our answer in miles per hour. So the next thing I might want to do is convert 80 days. Well, 1 day is equal to 24 hours. So my days will cancel out, and I'll take 80 times 24, and I'll get 1,920 hours. And then to find miles per hour, we just divide. So we're going to take our 25,132.74 divided by, that's miles, divided by 1,920 hours, and we'll see what we get. So 25,132.74 divided by 1,920 gives me 13.1 miles per hour. And so we can find out how fast he has to go to make it around the world in 80 days. 13 miles an hour. That's probably too fast for a frog. So our homework here, we've got page 478 through 480. I think the first question should be on page 478. You're going to do questions 1 through 8. So first 7 are just no applications, just they give you the circumference, you find the diameter. They give you the diameter, you find the circumference. Leave answers in terms of pi, include units. Then the last 2 here are some applications. So 8, you've got a word problem. 11, you've got a word problem. So give those a shot, and I'll hopefully see you soon.